Hello, my name is Rob Nafa, and today I'm going to be discussing my final research paper for Native American music at the University of Oklahoma. My kind of the basis of my paper today is kind of how we as a society have socially constructed this one single stereotype that we kind of incorporate all Native American tribes into that one single stereotype, and how we as a society constructed that stereotype, and kind of with the help of music. And so how different types of music have aided in this construction of this single stereotype that we kind of uh, use for all native tribes. So I want to start off by kind of bringing up an example that kind of has led to cultural misappropriation of Native American people and their culture and traditions. And that is something I feel like we can all relate with. The game called Cowboys and Indians that we would always play. I personally have played a lot when I was little with my friends. And you're kind of taught as kids that like the Indians are kind of like the savages in battle, and the Cowboys are almost in a way like the good guys. Um, and so this game has socially constructed this idea of Native Americans being savages, and it's very unfortunate because it's really painted them in a light that they aren't. Their culture is so unique and detailed, and it's quite opposite from be like just a bunch of savages with bow and arrows and headdresses, and so I felt like was a good way to like kind of start off this idea of cultural misappropriation towards Native American people, because it's something that I feel like we can all relate with. So I'm gonna go on now with my paper and kind of talk about some different terms that kind of have led to this single stereotype and this misappropriation of the Native American culture and their people. So first of all, just like Cowboys and Indians, we can see a ton of Native American theme things in our society uh, during like a bunch of school activities, with like the whole deal about celebrating Thanksgiving and all of that. There's Native American themed culture stuff in a lot of childhood songs that go to like we've changed lyrics to a lot of like very um, norm or very popular childhood songs like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Like for example, we've used that beat and changed it to like a Native American song with words that kind of have also led to misappropriation of like Native American culture and stuff like that. We see with sports teams, for example, the Florida State Seminoles football team, and the Redskins and the NFL. So there's a lot of Native American culture in our society today, and I feel like we don't really give it enough credit um, to the kind of like like in a way it leads this cultural misappropriation, and so that's what I'm going to talk about, and I feel like we as a society don't really realize it, and so yeah, that's what I'm going to go into. So first of all, I want to kind of coin this term and kind of define it, and we title it "Playing Indian," and that's kind of what Cowboys and Indians is. So we as kids always wanted to like wear the headdress and kind of like have the bow and arrow, like the stereotypical things about Native Americans and their culture that we have socially constructed. And so playing Indian is, like I said, it's kind of the idea that we wanted to like emulate their culture and traditions, and it was often used in a very not factual way. And so this is very, very, very important, because if we're representing a culture and their traditions and their people in a way that's not factual and very not true, then this can lead to kind of like us marginalizing a culture, like a whole culture, and that's kind of what we have done. And so I'm going to go through this paper and talk about how these different terms called idealized sympathy, cultural confusion, racial antipathy, cultural misappropriations, and then this idea also about blackface minstrel, which is another kind of example of how another ethnicity and culture has been misappropriated and kind of been put into a stereotype that's not really true about themselves and their cultures. So I'm going to begin with the blackface minstrelsy, and pretty much this was a show kind of during the Civil War that was kind of created in America, It was a form of entertainment that contained a variety of acts. So, for example, some like comic skits, dancing, and singing like that. And basically, what it was is these white performers would paint themselves with black paint to represent African American culture through musical entertainment, like I said, with dance skits, singing, dancing, stuff like that. And it kind of became a popular because it provided like white audiences with like a safe and like unthreatening and imaginary glimpse into like African American culture. So throughout all the struggles that were going on during the Civil War, it kind of, like I said, allowed the white people to kind of like feel like they understood the African American culture, and which they often did not. And so it kind of, this blackface minstrel show, it was a form of entertainment, but that more marginalized, stereotyped, and misrepresented African American culture in the Western world. And this is very problematic because if you think you're understanding a culture and like their traditions and values, and you're really not, then it'll marginalize that culture and those people and that culture and ethnicity, and it really like puts them like inferior to the whites. And a lot of the times these black minstrel shows were kind of in a comic manner, kind of mocking African American culture. So that was Black Minstrel Show, and that kind of led to this other idea within Native American culture called singing red face. And basically, what this is when a non-Native American person, usually a white person, will portray Native American people, Native American culture through music, using like a single stereotype, like I said earlier, with like what we think of as like the Indian, so like the headdress, bow and arrow, alcoholics, stuff like that. Basic stereotypes that we have socially constructed about Native American people. So it was kind of like the performer's goal in this singing red face to be perceived as Native American and to act with the same mannerisms as Native people. And so, like I said, with the Black Minstrel Show, with the same thing with this, a lot of times they were presented in a very comical way, and this was problematic because it was kind of it was like a false portrayal of their ethnicity and culture and stuff, and so it would marginalize Native American people and their culture, and the mockery kind of, it was a way for white people to kind of treat Native American people as inferior. So a lot of the times during singing red face performances, they would make fun of the culture and stuff, and so it really is unfortunate that like we as like a Western society and like our Western world like could kind of or to marginalize and like kind of devalue a whole ethnicity and culture just because we are falsely representing it in a way that is not true. One, and that's just like it makes them look not like very welcoming people and stuff, which they are. So another example of singing red face I found in Irving Berlin's musical titled Annie, Get Your Gun. And so this musical, it portrays a character, Annie, who's the main character, going through an Indian ritual. And they use the word Indian in this musical, which is also kind of a form of misappropriation towards Native Americans because they do not like to be called Indian. And it's kind of a false, like a false representation of their culture because we as like white settlers, or the white settlers back in the day, kind of, they thought that this was India, and so they started calling them Indians, which is just not true at all. But so the Indian chief in the play, in the musical, will inducted Annie into their tribe using Hollywood Engine English, and what that is it's defined as a composite of grammatical abnormalities that marks the way Indians speak and differentiates their speech from standard American English. And so Hollywood Engine English I thought, is a prime example of singing red face because it misrepresents Native American languages in a false manner. And it does this because what the Hollywood Engine English is basically just English with an Indian spin on it. And it causes the performer who is speaking the language to kind of sound childlike. And so, as you can imagine, this automatically portrays the Native people as inferior and subordinate to white actors, and are portraying the character who represents the white population as a whole. And so, along with the use of Hollywood Engine English, Annie, the character, sings a song when she's inducted into the tribe, and it's titled "I'm an Indian Too." And so I just kind of want to read like a few lines of the lyrics to the song, and then I'll talk about it. So it goes, I'll have totem poles, tomahawks, pipes apiece, which will go to prove that I'm an Indian too. So I thought these lyrics were very important when talking about singing red face because it's a direct example. Because Annie misrepresents the Native American culture by singing about like stereotypical items associated with the Native people, such as like the tomahawks and totem poles, stuff like that. What um, we as people that are non-natives kind of like think of them as like they're very stereotypical items that we associate with Native American people and their culture. And so altogether, singing Red Face, I believe it's credited with like a false representation of many aspects of Native American culture, and it's really made it difficult for to like eradicate the whole like playing Indian practice because it's been like passed on from generation to generation, starting with the singing Red Face practice. That it's kind of we've kind of made it okay to misrepresent a culture, and it's just become very problematic because um, we think of them as something that they're not, and so I believe that singing Red Face was a huge factor of why kind of Native American culture is misappropriated still today. So I'm gonna go on with kind of the idea of racial antipathy and kind of how that has led through music towards cultural misappropriation towards Native American people. So I'm going to define the term racial antipathy for you, and it's a group of people, often an entire race, who have a strong hatred towards like another racial group. And so I found an example of this in a song called Indian Giver, and this is by the musician Annette Funicello. I hope I'm saying that right. But she uses the word squaw in her lyrics throughout the song. And basically, what squaw is, it's a word that the white Europeans back in the day would use and towards the Native Americans and all the people. It's a very negative connotation because it kind of the white European settlers would refer to these native people as squaws, which to them was like referring to them as animals and inferior to the whites. And so this word stemmed from racial antipathy towards the native people, and it kind of like helped the white Europeans portray the Native American people as inferior and subordinate to them. So this is another prime example of how music perpetuated this cultural misappropriation of a whole entire culture, which is just very problematic. Okay, so another term I'm gonna go into is the idea of idealized sympathy. So although the misrepresentation of Native American culture in song is like often portrayed in a negative manner, so this is kind of the opposite of that with idealized sympathy in song. So I'm gonna define it for you. It's kind of the portrayal of Native American culture in a very overly sympathetic and kind of like in a way. Yeah, overly sympathetic and in a way kind of sarcastic. And it kind of comes off sarcastic sometimes, even if it's not meant to. So it kind of like counterintuitively marginalizes the native people even further. An example is Don Fardon's, who's an artist, his cover of Indian Reservation. In it, Fardon empathizes, like very genuinely empathizes with the Cherokee Nation over the devastation that happened during the Trail of Tears, during the relocation of the Cherokee tribe, and kind of the forced assimilation that the tribe endured throughout that entire period. However, Fardon refers to the Cherokees during this piece, Cherokees and the white Europeans, as two separate groups. And so, although he is empathizing with them and like feels for the Cherokees as a tribe, when he refers to the Cherokees and the white Europeans as two separate groups, it kind of describes how like the Cherokee Nation has died off, or like that's kind of what he's insinuating. And so this song further marginalizes the native people as inferior, and it does so in like a very empathetic fashion. So this, I feel like this provides a very strong example and evidence of idealized sympathy in song, and how it has further misappropriated their culture and marginalized their culture even further. And it did so in an empathetic way that we as a society might not think is actually perpetuating cultural misappropriation towards the native people. So continuing on with cultural misappropriation, I'm going to define that term for you, and it's the use of something that's created in one culture, and it's used in another culture in a negative way or like in the wrong way. So often it's for some sort of like personal gain, and I feel like a good example of cultural misappropriation towards the native people is seen with the Florida State football team. So the crowd does the tomahawk chop during games, and it's become a very like classic kind of a they do it every game, and they have for years and years. And I feel like this misappropriates in a negative way Native American culture because the fans use it to like kind of call themselves savages like on the football field and as a team, and like we're gonna be savages and kill you on the field. But this again, it misappropriates Native American culture and continues to like paint them in this manner that they're savages and that they just kill, kill, kill. And this has been a direct way for the Native American people to be represented in a false manner through music with the tomahawk chop, because there's a stereotypical Native American tune behind the tomahawk chop. They kind of chant. It's like a vocable in a powwow ceremony. This gesture has further marginalized and misappropriated the Native people, and it also allowed businesses to like make money off of selling tomahawk themed merchandise, because it can be like an appealing and like a an appealing mascot. And it really does help the fans kind of buy into the team, but at the same time it is a very negative connotation, and it kind of misrepresents the entire culture as a whole. So those are some good terms I feel like that represent kind of how we as a society have misappropriated a whole entire culture. And I think a large part of why all this has happened is because of this idea of cultural confusion. And basically, what cultural confusion is, it's the notion that false representation of ethnicity, of a whole ethnicity, it's kind of due to people really believing that they're accurately representing the culture, even though their information that they're perpetuating is completely false and not factual. And so it's often caused by like passing of information from generation to generation without even questioning whether the information is factual. And this is one of the largest challenges I feel like we as a society have faced when combating the misappropriation of Native American culture, because it often people are like taught that they're not really doing anything wrong. And that's kind of with the tomahawk chop. You kind of go to the football game thinking you're just cheering on your team, and you don't even realize that you're marginalizing entire society and culture by just like treating them as savages and kind of putting them in that painting, or just treating them as savages. And so what makes cultural confusions just so difficult to change, and like it's really hard to recognize, like I said, because you think you're just doing what is right, and because it's just been passed on from generation to generation, been twisted in a way that it just doesn't have any negative effects to it in our minds. But recently, more than ever, the Western world, as in the United States, and it's beginning to understand the negative effects of like how we misrepresent Native American culture. And so I believe with the help of natives and non-natives like myself, we as a society can advocate for change and be a voice for the underrepresented, representative, and misrepresentative Native American culture, people, and land. And I believe we can put an end to this. And if we're just mindful, we need to educate new generations so we can kind of break that transmission of cultural confusion that we've been doing during past generations. And so, like I said, we just need to be mindful and educate the youth. And we as a society can begin to treat Native American people for who they actually are. And it's an amazing culture. It's very detailed, unique, so much tradition. And I feel like we as a society and Americans should begin to immerse ourselves and try to learn about Native American culture, traditions, and through music especially, because it's such a big part of their culture and traditions. And so I believe we can start to combat this with education of the youth. And I think that's it for my paper. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.